I want to run this by you, Alan, because it's a hypothetical preseason trade offered up by Seth Walder. He is an ESPN sports analytics writer at Seth Walder on Twitter. Here is the prospective trade, and you tell me which side would be interested in doing it or if a side would not be so interested. This has to do with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. The Niners would trade Trey Lance to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers along with a second-round pick and a sixth-round pick from next year. In exchange, the Niners would get Tampa Bay's second-round pick, and they'd get a third-round pick for next year. The rationale from Seth Walder is the Bucs aren't contenders this year, so their moves should be focused on saving money and acquiring draft assets. They might as well use the upcoming games as a testing ground for a potential future QB, even if that's a long shot. And Seth goes on to say that precisely describes Lance. If there's a 10% chance that Lance can become a long-term solution for the Bucs, that's higher than Baker Mayfield's chances to be that guy. Right now, Tampa Bay's got Kyle Trask and Baker Mayfield as QBs 1 and 2. The thinking being you get Trey Lance in, you give Trey Lance a season, and maybe you hit on something. If Kyle Shanahan liked him coming out of the draft and you can get him for just a second and a third round pick and it's a second round swap, what do you think about that in terms of the Niners? If I'm the Niners, I look at this potential trade. I would love to get a second and a third for Trey Lance right now.
Right, a second and a third, and obviously the Bucs. It's not the greatest division, but you got to think the Niners are going to do better than the Bucs, so it would be a higher second round pick.
It's a second round swap. So you figure if you're the Niners, you're going to be drafting 58th or 59th. You're going to be at the end of the second round, and the Bucs will be closer to the top of the second round. So let's say you're trading pick 59 in exchange for pick 35 coming back. So you do get a pretty significant second round upgrade, and you also get a third-round pick from Tampa next year. You give up a sixth, and you give up your second in the swap, and you also give up Trey Lance.
Right. So I'm looking here at the depth chart for the Bucs. Obviously, they got Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, Russell Gage. So they have holes, but they also have a lot of offensive pieces. And I think it makes sense. I don't know what Baker Mayfield is going to do. I don't know. I mean, you would think he'd be able to be decent. It feels like he played decently with the Rams, so maybe he's not completely done, but you're pretty sure that he's not going to be your franchise guy. And these guys, the weapons that Tampa Bay has, a lot of them are still in their prime, so you don't want to waste that. You're in a bit of a tough position. You already got your ring, thank goodness, but you're trying to figure out what the future looks like. I would on both sides, it makes sense. On both sides, it makes a lot of sense. You would send Trey Lance to a place where he doesn't have zero weapons. He would be in an okay spot, you know what I mean, to build from there. It makes sense on both sides. And if you're San Francisco and you truly think that Brock is the guy, which it's much easier to let go of somebody if you truly think that they're cooked. But if Trey Lance does play well, is it a little bit harder to see the guy that you did give that draft capital up for and the guy that you did pick and start to mold, if he does start to play well, would it be tougher? But on paper, no pun intended, this makes a lot of sense. From
Dylan in the 209, that trade's a no dog, and he's playing off of the Mark Willard sound, which I can appreciate that.
That's going to be a no from me, dog.
And I wonder about the 49ers' perspective on this, because as I mentioned before, the Niners won't give a second contract to Brock Purdy and Trey Lance. So at the end of this upcoming year, they have to decide on Trey Lance and his fifth-year option. So if Brock Purdy is going to be the guy, that means that Trey Lance is not going to be the guy. No matter how Trey Lance plays in the preseason or how he looks in practice, if you choose Brock because he stays healthy and he's QB1 and he plays well enough to keep that job, well, then you're going to be done with Trey Lance anyway. So if you can get a second-round pick swap and pick up a third-round pick, you've already got Sam Darnold at the ready as your backup in waiting. I don't know if you spend a whole year and you don't play Trey Lance at all, or you play him very sparingly, does his price tag go up to where you get more than a second and a third if he doesn't play? I don't think so.
Well, the only thing I would say, the one thing is it's always dangerous with the Niners because the Niners seem to just be connected to quarterback injuries. They can't get away from it. But my thought process is this, Dibs. Mitch Trubisky. Mitch Trubisky is a guy who on the Bears, okay, are you going to work? Didn't work out. He goes to the Bills, doesn't play at all, but because almost as if, hey, I couldn't play, so I couldn't mess up, he got another opportunity with the Steelers. Didn't end up being the guy there as they're going with Kenny Two Gloves, but he got another opportunity. So the only thing I would say, I think that there is a possibility that just sitting behind Brock could work for the Niners, and just in case, but because of that just in case, and let's not forget Brock had, I call it major surgery with his UCL. If Brock does go down, you better be sure that Sam Darnold is your guy, number one. And number two, if you hold on to Trey gets in the game, and who knows what Trey does, and then all of a sudden Trey could lose, even if it's just for a couple games. What if Trey doesn't look good, and now that hype train that everybody's been on with Trey that's been building dies down, and now instead of a second and a third, now Tampa Bay says, now you're going to get a fourth and a fifth. And if you're the Niners, at that point, you're going to have to take it because you don't want it to drop anymore.
Right.
So interesting timing.
It's very interesting because you obviously want to sell high and buy low on anybody. You bought low on Brock Purdy, and it turns out you found something that you love because now he's QB1.
Right.
Even though he's coming off an injury, there's no sense that there's any QB competition between Sam and Brock and Trey. It's Brock's job.
Right.
So assuming that, and now if Brock Purdy gets hurt and hurt really badly again, well, now you've got an interesting question because like you said, if you keep Trey and Trey's your backup and Trey plays poorly, you've got no trade value for Trey Lance. If Trey plays and he plays well and Brock's out for the year, now you got a good old-fashioned quarterback controversy going into next year.
Right.
And, you basically have Sam Darnold as your QB3 insurance policy, but the more I think about the Niners and the way they've done things, it feels like they brought in Sam Darnold to be QB2 or at least have a chance to be QB2. And all we've heard out of camp is Trey looks good, Trey's improved, Trey's worked really hard in his game, and all the rest of it. Are they building him up to keep him or building him up to flip him? That to me is the $10 million question.
It truly is. It truly is. And I think that when you look at the offense that they run in Tampa Bay, I don't know. It might be, we just talked about Jimmy Garoppolo and a fresh start. I've been #free Trey, but only #free Trey as it pertains to, I just want him to get an opportunity. If Brock's really your guy and you paid Sam Darnold $4.5 million, it makes sense to move him. But if you feel, that's the thing. Are you keeping Trey number two because you want to deal him for optics, or do you truly think he's better than Sam Darnold? Because if you truly think he's better than Sam Darnold, then didn't you kind of overpay Sam Darnold?
Essentially, if that's the way you look at it. If Trey beats out Sam, and we'd love to get your calls on this, 888-957-9570. We see Steve and Bob and Mike, all of you on hold. We'll get to you momentarily. But if you paid Sam and Trey beats out Sam, and Sam becomes QB3 and he's inactive on game day and he's that emergency third quarterback, well then, yeah, it's a bit of a financial waste. But you did that last year with Sudsy. Nate Sudfeld was given $2 million guaranteed, and you cut him before the year even started because Brock Purdy beat him out. So the Sam Darnold money, while it sounds like a lot, I think it's $4 million essentially, it's a sunk cost already. So if you find that Trey beats him out, and you want to keep Trey, and Brandon Allen's good enough to be QB3, you cut Sam Darnold, and you just be done with it, and it becomes a small, lower-level mistake. I don't think it's one that's going to hurt you in the cap, and it's not going to keep you from signing Nick Bosa.
Sure, I mean, it's that.
And it's not my money, so.
Right, well, it's losing that $4 million versus trading somebody that you gave up 3 picks to get.
Fair enough.
Either way, you're not going to look like a genius in the situation.
From the 925, they are waiting until preseason to deal Trey and Dibs. I'll take your comments on the air. It's an uptick there, which is nice. A little throwback to Jolo and Dibs from the 209. Finding Brock house money. Need to be willing to go broke on Lance at this stage. That's Dylan again. Dylan weighing in from the 209 on the text line. I know what he's saying about being willing to go broke on Lance, but at some point, you got to cut your losses. If you don't believe in Trey Lance, and I'm not saying that they do, but if you as the Niners are feeling like Trey Lance is not good enough, then at some point you've got to make a move to recoup something back.
Right. And that's what we're continuing to say about this Niner offense. It's not necessarily that Trey can't ever be good within this offense, but it's also the timing like you talked about and the team option and the roster. This is not a Benjamin Button roster. They're not getting younger, they're getting older. So you have to perform at the highest that you can with the personnel that you think is going to work best. So look, if you're able to get a second and a third, honestly, that doesn't look that bad. If you're able to get a second and a third and you have your franchise guy, that doesn't look that bad to me.
Well, it's a second-round swap, so you're really only getting a third, and you're sending Trey in a sixth. So basically, it's Trey in a sixth for a third.
Yes.
And you do get a second-round swap, which might be 20 spots, so that's not nothing, but it essentially is, it's less than you're getting a second and a third.
Yeah, but let's talk about this for a second. And I get it, the difference is they did move up to get Trey. But with that being said, Sam Darnold is on the Niners, fighting to be QB2, maybe QB3. Sam Darnold was a third overall pick. If you send Trey to Tampa Bay, who is he going up against? Baker Mayfield, a former first overall pick. I mean, teams miss all the time, right? You try not to, but teams miss all the time. So I think if the Niners keep that in perspective and they're not, and even the fans are not looking at it, oh my gosh, how can I miss? Teams miss all the time. Go back, if you're ever at home or wherever you're at, while you're listening, of course, on YouTube, Twitch, or,
he's a veteran.
Via FM, go through all the different NFL drafts, and you will find some funny names that you haven't seen in a very long time. Oh, my gosh, they took that guy in the top 10. Oh, my gosh, they took that guy in the top 5.
Well, even
it happens.
The Darnold draft where they had Josh Rosen, Rosen one.
They're going to regret this.
Yeah, and that one didn't really work out.
All these teams are going to regret
Steve is in the city. Steve is looking at things a little bit differently. What's going on, Steve? You're on 95.7 The Game.
Hey, guys. It strikes me that trading Trey Lance right now is like buying a house in 2008 and then panicking and selling it at the end of 2009. Some people might call that a flip. I call that a bad trade. But I wanted to get your guys' take on a little twist, because I think it speaks to perhaps Brock's general value. Do you guys think Brock Purdy would command that same trade that you've been talking about? Because I'm not so sure if he would.
He would command much more, Steve, I think, and thank you for the phone call. And he's shown more than Trey Lance on the field, and his contract is the most team-friendly QB contract maybe in league history.
I've been on this, Dibs, and I know we're up against it, and I'm very glad Steve called because I've been on this for a while, and the fact that
the trade Brock.
Well, no,
trade
not
Brock.
Not trade Brock. No, the question is, again, going back to the Niners, how good that team is and Brock's value. How many teams look at Brock and say, I need that guy? I have no clue, and I'm very curious as to where you fall on this because I don't know, right? And it depends on the team. Maybe the Bucs, because they do have weapons, they might think, to me, Brock feels like a younger, more slippery, more elusive Jimmy Garoppolo.
Right.
So because of that, whereas Trey Lance is, this guy can, if Trey Lance hits his ceiling, he can cover up some things that we're missing. I don't know if Brock can do that just based on ceilings, but Brock isn't going to mess up and miss layups the same way that Trey does right now.
And Brock is 1/25th the cost of Jimmy Garoppolo. So I do think the value of the contract plays into just how valuable Brock Purdy is in terms of what Steve was saying, a possible trade. So if you're a team out there like Tampa Bay who might look for a quarterback reboot, and you could get a guy who is undefeated so far in games he started and finished, and he's making $900,000, you're going to take that player knowing that you got Brock Purdy under team control for 2 more years before you were even allowed to give him more money.